chapter 22. The final week, and I guess in reality it wasn't really the final, but there is a week that we refer to as Holy Week. Eight days in which significant things took place. It actually begins with where we were this past Sunday. Day one, Sunday, the first day of the week. Jesus entered into Jerusalem. Palm Sunday. Now, don't think that the things I'm going to share with you are the only things that happened on these particular days. There were other things. It was a very busy week for our Lord and His disciples. But I chose the one that I felt was most significant. Day one, Sunday, Jesus enters into Jerusalem. Day two, Monday. Jesus goes to the temple. That was normal for him. And as he prepared to enter into the temple, he saw tables set up. And there were money changers at the table. If you went to the temple and did not have a sacrifice, they would provide you one. Now that may not sound bad, but believe me, it was at an exorbitant price. These people were making huge profits. And the Lord got so angry, He turned over the tables. According to Him, they were making the house of God into something it should not be made into. Day three, Tuesday. The most significant thing that stood out to me was that was the day that Jesus gave the Olivet Discourse. It's a sermon about end times. Jesus prophetically gave things in that sermon. Some of them would take place quickly, dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem to a great extent. But also, it was prophetic. Some of them are yet to take place. It's a great, great teaching. Day 5, Thursday, Jesus is at the Garden of Gethsemane. We're familiar with that story. He prays in such agony because of what awaits him. Day 6, Friday. Jesus is tried and He's crucified. Good Friday. Some would say not good for Him. And even those of us who are followers of Christ struggle with that sometime. But actually, there's significance. In the end, it would be very good for us, the crucifixion of Christ. And I think in many ways it was good for Him, because He was able to persevere and do the thing that when He prayed in the garden was so intense for Him that He struggled. And He was able to do it. Day 7, that's Saturday. Jesus' body is placed in a tomb. By the way, His spirit and soul are not there. It's just His body. In fact, He's busy on that day. Day 8, Sunday. The resurrected Jesus presents Himself to a number of people, showing that He's very much alive. Now, I skipped a day. I skipped day 4. And I did it deliberately because that's Wednesday. What happened on Wednesday? Several things actually, but what was the thing that, at least to me, was most paramount? Luke chapter 22, verse 3, we'll find out. Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him, Christ. How he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. Back in the upper room, Jesus instituted what we consider the Lord's Supper. We'll be doing that, by the way, in the first part of April. Not actually the first Sunday, but we'll be doing that then. Lord's Supper. And Judas, we're told in verse 4, went his way. Hang on to that phrase. It's important. What was the way of Judas? 3 things. First, his began as a way of glory. Glory. When we first meet Judas, It is a joyous occasion. He has chosen, along with 11 others. He was a part of the 12. Judas. Think about it. What an honor. Now we run into a place here that needs a little bit of discussion. Hopefully, we all believe in the foreknowledge of God, right? The foreknowledge of God means that He knows everything. He knows everything past. He knows everything present. He knows everything in the future. The foreknowledge of God. Only God knows that. We can speculate. We can surmise. But we can't do with certainty. Because we don't have that ability. But God does. Now that brings us to a place that modern Christendom has struggled with for years. If, in fact, as we do believe in the foreknowledge of God and that He knows everything, why did He choose Judas? Isn't that legitimate? Someone may ask you that sometime. Someone who is not a believer. They may ask you that. If your Jesus, God, knows everything, why did He choose Judas? How do we reconcile this? Now, the easiest statement is, and it may need some more clarification as you begin to talk to this person if they ask you that. Don't be afraid to. The easiest question is, Jesus had to go to the cross. He had to. There was no getting around it. If He was going to fulfill the will of His Father, He must go to the cross. Because sin had to be paid for. Not His, but ours. Someone had to be a part of that, right? And that someone, and it's what happened on Wednesday, day 4, that person happened to be Judas. Did the actions of Judas catch Jesus off guard? Of course not. He knew. Back to the upper room, remember? Jesus predicted that one of them would betray Him. Right? We'll get to that later on. He knew. He knew. Judas had the same opportunity. That first point's a way of glory. Judas had the same opportunity to go down in church history as walking alongside of his fellow disciples. To be named with people like Simon Peter, James, John, and even those that we don't hear as much about. Every single one of them were important. And they occupy special places in church history. Every one of them. They all suffered tragic endings, even John, banished, left on an island to die. That's when God gave him the great revelation. Judas had that same opportunity. And when we first meet him, he's one of the 12. So his was a way of glory. Someone may ask you, and this is important, be ready for this. Does that mean that if Jesus knew what Judas was going to do, that he spiritually manipulated him to where he did what he did because somebody had to do it? No. Go back to the foreknowledge of God. God knows everything. And God looked into the heart of Judas, and he knew what Judas's end would be, and we'll get there a little later. Judas, don't lose sight of this, Judas did what he did of his own volition. And Jesus died for Judas just as much as he did for the rest. But Judas made the wrong decision. And it's just like tens of thousands of people have done through history and are doing now. Jesus died for them. And they make the wrong decision. There's only two. We either receive Christ or we reject Him. That's it. Second, a way of greed. Greed. Judas had a problem that the Word of God actually condemns. Very familiar passage. 1 Timothy 6, verse 10. It says, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Money within itself, it's not evil. No. Absolutely not. The love of money. There are people to whom money becomes their God. And Judas was one of them. I always thought it was so ironic in some way that Judas was named the treasurer of the group. And he's a man of greed. That would have given him opportunities. Now keep in mind, Jesus and his men are not supported by any group or anything like that. They are dependent on the support of friends. even the eating of meals. Mary and Martha, Lazarus comes to mind. And I don't doubt for a moment that there were those who believed in Jesus and his ministry and supported him in some way, but it was not lush. Most of the time, they barely got by. In fact, there was one time that they couldn't even pay their taxes. It's a good time to be talking about that. They couldn't even pay their taxes. Remember that? And Jesus said, guys, go fish. Go fish. And they did, and a fish had the tax money inside of it. You say, well, that don't prove anything. It proves a whole lot to me. What are the odds of that happening? No, that was a God thing. Here's my theory. Jesus had been warning his men of his impending doom. I think at first they denied it, but he continued to talk about it, and they continued to listen. Then factor in the fact that people are becoming increasingly indignant toward them, particularly toward Christ. I think Judas picked up on this. In fact, he may have picked up on it more than any of them. I believe that he perceived that what Jesus had been telling them was going to happen, that he was going to die. Now keep in mind, what's the second point? His was a way of greed. I think Judas, this is just my heart. I think Judas at this point says, I have given over 3 years of my life following this man. I have really nothing to show for it. Nothing. I could have been busy. I could have been financially better off. So I believe that Judas thinks this over, and he comes to the conclusion, I'm going to get out of this what I can. Judas went his way. It began as a way of glory. We also know that it was a way of greed. Thirdly, finally, a way of guilt. Fast forward to the upper room. I touched on it a moment ago. Jesus said, and I spoke of it earlier, as they sat around the table, Jesus said, one of you will betray me. Can you imagine what that was like? At least in theory, these should have been the closest friends that Jesus had on earth. And Jesus looks at them. Perhaps he scanned the whole group. And he said, one of you will betray me. Remember what they did? They began to say, every one of them, all 12, begin to say, Lord, is it I? Is it I? And I think there's something good that could be said about that. I think they realized something that hopefully we all understand. There are none of us above and beyond a catastrophic spiritual failure. Any of us are just one temptation away. So they begin to ask, Lord, is it I? And I think they were really serious. I think Judas asked the same thing. Finally, it appears as though they're not getting anywhere. John, the beloved. John has had enough, and he said, Lord, who is it? Which one is it? And in John's Gospel, chapter 13, Jesus gives the answer. He said, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. There was something that I think we would probably relate to, maybe like a gravy, if you will. And it was part, along with the bitter herbs and everything else, it was part of the Passover celebration. So picture this in your mind. There's that bowl. We'll just call it gravy. They have a piece of bread. It is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. John had just asked, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered. So everybody in the room at that time knows, according to Jesus, who the one would be that would betray Jesus. You would almost think, and again I'm surmising, you would almost think that they would have done a gang tackle at that time. That the other 11 would just pounce on Judas. Maybe even put him away. But that couldn't happen. Dastardly as it was, Judas had a job to do. Jesus, we are told in one of the gospel accounts, looked at Judas and he said, go. Go do what you must do. That brings us back to our opening text. Then Satan entered Judas, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. Now, according to the timeline, I think that he had already met with them. When Jesus said, "Go, do what you must do," he had a meeting with them. I know where Jesus is going to be. The very moment. So get the soldiers together. I'm going to take you to him. The storyline says evidently Judas had given them an amount of money, and it said that they agreed gladly. They want Jesus, but not all of them really know who he is. So Judas leads this party to him. He's just been where? In the Garden of Gethsemane. There's a lot of things happened there. I spoke on this not too long ago. Simon Peter jerks out his sword and intends to kill one of the soldiers. And not only did Jesus stop him, but he healed the man in which Simon Peter had cut off his ear. Healed him. So Judas's plan worked monetarily. But immediately he began to realize what he had just done. That's why I said it was a way of guilt. I think the whole sickening thing became aware to him. I have sold out the master. In fact, it got so bad, it weighed so heavily on him that he took his own life. He killed himself. Now, to those who would say, well, that's remorse. He was repentant. He was sorry for what he did. So I believe in the end, Judas was forgiven. No. No. You know what Judas was sorry about? He was sorry he got caught. There's a big difference in being sorry you get caught and being truly repentant. It weighed so heavily on him. He went back, according to the gospel story, to the people that he had conspired with and told them he didn't want the money and threw it down. And you know what they said? We could care less. We've got what we want. Judas pointed out who Jesus was by planting a holy kiss on him. That was also part of the plan. You'll know who it is by the common greeting of our people. Judas, it's just so sad for me. I know it had to be done, but it's so sad. He had so much potential. But there was something bigger than Jesus to him, and that was greed, money. And in the end, it cost him his life. Sad. Very sad. We remember Simon Peter. We hear him say, "Thou art the Christ. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." We remember him standing up at Pentecost, preaching. We remember the Pastor James and all the others, even those that not as much is spoken of. We remember John as we read the beloved Revelation. And sadly, we remember Judas. Not in a good way. That's what happened on Wednesday. Let's stand.